Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here with a card featuring some Copic coloring as well as a Neat and Tangled stamp. So to get started with my Copic background this time, I decided to change things up a bit and use my Copic Airbrush system. I was gifted this last Christmas, not this most recent one, and it's something that I've had to kind of get used to. A couple of things to consider with the Copic marker airbrush system is that you do need sketch markers as they fit in the barrel. I think maybe the original markers do too, but the chows don't. And it uses up a fair amount of ink, just like any making of backgrounds, which I like to do with my Copics. So it's good to have some refills. And that's something that I've kind of been working on my refill collection this year. But anyway, to create my background, I am spraying down some B28, B26, B24, and B21. And I'm basically going from darkest to lightest. I like that it covers a background really quickly. I've done a similar background in the past, but I just used like applying marker by running it across the page, and it took a lot longer. However, it does take some getting used to use the Copic system. The first couple times I tried, I just felt like it was spraying unevenly, and I didn't really know how to hold and angle things. And so, like any new tool, it takes some time to learn. And I do, as I mentioned before, it doesn't work with chows. I do have a fair amount of chows in my collection, so I kind of have to work within those. And I can't, use certain ranges of colors because there'll be a chow in between or something. But I did realize that blue is a great background color. So blue is one I've chose to make sure that whenever I purchase a blue marker, I try to go for the sketch. So now that I have a sort of base on there, and as you can see, it's not perfectly even, and that is not the point. It's just to get some color down there. And I'm going to be covering it with this wave detail, so the unevenness is going to be even less noticeable. To create this sort of wave or ripple effect that I'm going for here, I am going to use the side of my Copic marker, and I'm going to use the same color range. So I started with B28. I'm going to put B28 waves on top of it. To create the waves, side of the marker, very gentle, light, dabbing, kind of a dashing motion too, because you don't want to create straight lines, but you also don't want to create a line that goes solidly across the page. You want some really short ones and some longer ones. So sometimes I touch the marker very gently up and down, and then sometimes I let it sort of linger a bit longer and create a longer line. But it's just something that you could practice a little bit ahead of time if you haven't done it before. I've done this in the past, so I'm a little bit more familiar with the technique, but it's nothing too difficult to accomplish. It is has a bit of a scribbly effect, and so you don't need to be good with blending to create this background. Kind of the same thing I said last time with the background, that I created a mountain background recently, and I just like that you can actually create some really interesting backgrounds without being super good with Copic marker. I think that I know a lot about Copic markers. I've taken a lot of great classes, but I'm not an expert yet with them. But I can still have fun creating these backgrounds. The colors being on top of each other, using a B28 on top of the B28 works in this instance because when you lay it down with the airbrush system, it is a bit lighter. And so when I apply the marker directly, it's darker and it appears on top of each other in terms of color. This is the Neat and Tangled Flamingo Floatie stamp set. When it first came out, I resisted it for a few months. And then eventually when I was ordering anyway, and I think they were having a sale or something, I caved and I finally bought it because if I had all the time and budget in the world, I would own everything Elena, I think is how you say it, designs for them because her little characters are so cute. So I'm going to be coloring today with a slightly darker skin tone. I think it could work for someone who is Caucasian, but it could also work for some other races or ethnicities of people. And I like to just vary it up. I try not to color all my people with the same skin tone, in part because I donate my cards. And so I never know what color skin the person who receives the card will have. Although in this case, I think I did send this one to a family member. So, but anyway, I just think it's important to consider some different skin combinations and have fun exploring those. So today I'm using E15, 13, and 11. I found that in coloring this particular person, little image, it was better to lay an overall color of E11 and then try to do some blending rather than just blending dark to light, which I will often do to save some time. I'm going to do simple cast shadows throughout this coloring rather than light source coloring because my background, I mean for it to kind of look like a pool with ripples in it, and that's why I chose a very bright blue. It's not a sort of oceany blue, although there are beautiful parts of the world where the ocean looks like that. Anyway, I totally lost my train of thought there. I'm sorry, guys. It's not going to be super, super realistic. And therefore, I don't have a very defined light source. I just use some simple cast shadows. So I'm going to do the same thing with the bathing suit. I'm going to make sure that the shadows are on the edges of the bathing suit so that it gives her a sort of rounded look, gives her some dimension. I chose some blues, this case specifically BG 57 and 53 for the bathing suit because I didn't want the bathing suit to stand out. I wanted the pink to really stand out, which is another reason I chose those really bright blues for the background. And if I chose another complementary color like a green for the bathing suit, it would really draw some undue attention to that, and that wasn't the focus of my card today. For the flamingo, I did look at some pictures of flamingos. I saw they have that light pink detail and then a black beak, so I went with W9 and W5. I think any of the blacks would do well. Sorry, any of the grays. That's a warm gray. And I am going to go in and color the hair. I learned a lot about coloring hair from taking Kit and Clowder classes. They are run by Lise Keegan, I believe is how you say it, and I will leave you a link in the video description to Kit and Clowder because she does have a free class that talks a little bit about coloring hair. So basically, I'm thinking about where there will be highlights and shadows on the hair. For instance, there will always be a shadow at the top of the head and then a little like kind of bump out for the hair. So that's how I'm coloring it. And I do want there to look like there's some interest to the hair. There's some individual strands. So I am using flicking motions as opposed to a really perfect blend and laying the flicks on top of each other and extending the flicks over each other. So I will make shorter flicks of the darkest color. And then when I go to the next color, I'll make repeated flicks, but they will be a little bit longer and then a little bit longer with the lightest color to extend that out without blending it per se. And I used E29, 27, and 25 for the hair. I thought that worked well with this skin tone, but of course you could mix it up, especially if you were trying to like make it look like the specific individual you were sending it to. With the flamingo, I am going to do a more traditional flat blend. I actually colored, the first time I colored the flamingo, I colored it with the flicking motions as if like to kind of give it the sense of having feathers or texture. And then I was like, it's a pool floatie. It shouldn't have any texture. It should be perfectly smooth and even perhaps shiny. So in the end, I didn't like that. And I chose to color a second one with a smoother blend. I'll still, of course, use the other one. It's not like it looks so bad I have to toss it or something. That's just silly. But I just wanted to show you the smoother blend. Again, cast shadows. Her leg is going to cast a shadow. So around her leg will be a darker color. The wing is going to cast a shadow on the body. Her hand is going to cast a shadow on the body. I will add some other random shadows, like I add a shadow by the beak. That's not really a cast shadow per se. It just adds some dimension and interest. I am using R's for pink colors. RVs are kind of more traditionally pink, but I have had a bit of a hard time blending RVs and finding like my perfect pink combo in RVs. So I have found this R8 combo, R85, R83, R81 that I really like for pink. And there's also an R89, which can deepen it even more. To fussy cut out an image that has those little like details where there's that space between her body and the flamingo, I actually just cut right along the lines, and then I'm able to go in and trim that out. And by making sure that I cut along the stamp line, like cutting exactly along the line where her arm meets the flamingo, I am able to then sort of tape it back together later, and it really doesn't look like it's been cut. in any sort of negative way, and instead gives me that sort of perfect fussy cut. There are dies available for this set. I don't think they cut out that small detail, and then of course they leave the white border, which is just not what I was going for this time. You could also have masked her off and stamped her directly on the surface, but you would have to do the same thing where you have to like cut out that detail on the mask. I don't know. I personally kind of tend towards adding the image on top of a detailed background just in case I mess up the backgrounds. I enjoy making backgrounds, but I don't feel like I'm an expert at it yet. So I just avoid putting my stamps down and doing masking. Anyway, I want to use these Kat Scrappiness stitched flags for the sentiment. I want to add a bit more pink to the card. I thought the idea of like, trust me, you're fabulous, which is the sentiment. I'm going to use the idea of fabulous with pink, partly because of the flamingo, but also just because pink is fabulous. So that's why I wanted to add that. But I'm not going to go find a color of pink cardstock in my stash that perfectly matches the flamingo I colored. I'm just going to color it with Copic marker. To me, it's easier. And I do the same thing with distressing, because if I make a distressing background, I just pull that same distress ink and make a bit of cardstock for my embellishments. I've done it many, many times on my channel. I can't recommend it enough. I'm going to emboss my sentiments on top of it. So I use an embossing magic powder bag so that the embossing powder doesn't stick where I don't want it. But I also had to make sure that my Copic marker was dry, because when you just finish Copic marker coloring, it stays wet for a tiny, tiny bit. And so if you try to emboss right away, then sometimes you can get the embossing powder to stick to the Copic that's wet rather than to your ink. I used VersaFine Onyx Black ink, a black sticky ink, and then clear embossed over it so it looks like black embossing. But black embossing powder just sticks more where you don't want it. I'm going to use some tweezers to hold on to these sentiment strips so that I don't burn my fingers. If I put it directly on my mat, the heat gun would just kind of make it fly away. But of course, I'm using metal tweezers, so they'll be hot. Use some common sense, of course, I know you all will. But be careful, because if you touch the tweezers afterwards, you just heated them up, and, not great. But I also wouldn't want you to hold it with your fingers, because then you'll burn your fingers. So anyway, I trim up those a little bit to fit them onto the card. I do lose the stitching detail at the end, but it's just the way that it worked out for me. And I actually like that the Trust Me You Are is a little bit lighter overall than the Fabulous, because of the way that it was cut. But you could have saved some marker by not coloring the whole thing, since I, cut some off. As I add the foam tape, I'm going to make sure that my piece of foam tape bridges where I made those cuts. So I cut right through her hair, right through her arm, or where her arm and hair meet the flamingo specifically. And so by adding the foam tape over those, I do kind of ensure that it will look more complete and like it hadn't ever been cut. Now I'm ready to do some embellishing of sorts. And I'm going to add some of these splash marks around her. Initially, I thought if I did some clear embossing of the splash marks, it would add a tiny bit of interest in a really subtle way. And then when I did it, I felt like you couldn't even see it. You can kind of see it when there's the white on top of it. When you melt it, it just completely like fades. And almost, I felt like looks more like a mistake than intentional. So I'm going to color over them instead. But first, I'm going to add 3 splashes. When I add embellishments, I generally add them in 3 places. I create a little like visual triangle around my focal point, which in this case is the girl on the floatie. And I tried to think about where the splashes made sense. So I put a splash behind the flamingo as, if they're moving along, creating a little splash. I put one by her foot and one by her hand, with the idea if she was sort of like flinging her arm out or kicking her feet, playing in the pool, that would do some splashes. So just as like an idea of, because I know sometimes some people say they struggle with like where to put those little details, what makes it look interesting. So I try to share my thought process a little bit. I'm going to color over the embossing with my Copic markers. This isn't necessarily recommended. They're your markers. Decide if that's what you want to do with them. I thought about initially just coloring the inside, but I just kept accidentally coloring the embossed parts. And Copic marker will color that plasticky embossing because it's an alcohol ink, an alcohol-based ink. So I just colored the whole thing. So I colored over the embossing and in between the embossing, but I liked how it turned out. If you didn't want to use your Copic markers for that, just pick any old random blue marker in your stash to add that detail and not worry about your Copics. Once I had that down, I thought, well, it's about being fabulous. So what this card really needs to finish it off is just a little bit of sparkle. And so I decided to go with my Kat Scrappiness jewels, because if I went with the jewels, I would get sparkle and a bit more pink, and we could always use more pink, at least on this card anyway. So I will put them again in a visual triangle around the focal image. I'm not going to perfectly pair it up with the splashes, because again, those splashes were meant more as like, you know, her actually interacting with the background. And the gems kind of make it less of a scene card too, because there wouldn't be like these random gems floating in the pool. And also it takes away a bit of the dimension. It makes it look a bit more flat, but I was okay with that. I'm still happy with the card overall, and I like the way the gems look because I don't think it's a hyper realistic Copic background anyway. You could also use a stencil to create a similar effect. I think Neat and Tangled even has like a cool wave stencil. But these gems are Kat Scrappiness gems in fuchsia and pretty pink, so a light and a dark pink. And I kind of varied them up a little bit around her. So that's it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. In the video description, I'll leave a link to the products that I used, as well as to Kit and Clowder, where you could take a free class and learn even more about Copic coloring. And I will also leave you a link to my D-Stash page so you can check that out. Have an awesome day. Bye.